In 1856, a few hundred stonemasons put down their tools on a building site in Melbourne and walked into the middle of the city. They were carrying a banner, and on that banner were three numbers: 8, 8, 8. One of those eights is the reason you think there is something wrong with you at 3 in the morning. You have been told your whole life that a human being needs 8 hours of unbroken sleep. Something on your wrist or your bedside table may well have graded you on it this morning. Nobody measured that. There was no study, no laboratory, no physician who counted. The number came off that banner, off an argument about factory hours. The 8 hours you are supposed to be asleep is simply the part of the day that was left over once work and leisure had taken theirs. And there is something stranger underneath it. For most of European history, people did not sleep through the night at all. They slept twice, and got up in between, in the dark, on purpose, and used the hour for things. That is worth following properly, because of what the number does now. We are the first people in history to be scored against a sleep target every morning by a machine, and to feel we have failed before the day has started. So it seems worth knowing whether the figure on the other side of that judgment was ever a fact about a body at all. So where did the 8 come from, if not from a laboratory? Ask most people, and they will tell you it is simply what the body needs. That 8 is a quantity like blood pressure or body temperature, discovered rather than decided. It is a strange thing to believe once you look at it, because nobody can tell you who discovered it. There is no famous experiment attached to it, no name, no year, no moment. For a number that governs a third of every life, it arrived from nowhere in particular and was never questioned, which is usually the signature of something that was not discovered at all. The first crack in it came from a historian rather than a doctor. Roger Owen spent years in the archives of early modern Britain. Diaries, letters, court depositions, medical books, and kept meeting a phrase that makes no sense to a modern reader. People wrote about their first sleep and then, quite casually, about their second. They were not describing a complaint. They went to bed not long after dark, slept a few hours, woke in the small hours, and stayed awake. For an hour, sometimes longer. Then they slept again until morning. The waking hour was not wasted, and it was not feared. People talked and prayed and had sex and got up to do small, quiet jobs by the fire and went next door and then went back to bed. Nobody thought any of it worth explaining, which is precisely why it took a historian to notice it at all. Owen found it everywhere, across centuries, in hundreds of separate references. It is one of the strangest things I know about ordinary life, that the night used to have a room in the middle of it, and then that room closed. And that is where the story usually gets left. Meanwhile, a physiologist in Chicago was asking a different question, and he was asking it of the body rather than the archive. Nathaniel Kleitman wanted to know whether the 24-hour day is something we are built with, or something the sun has simply trained into us. Because if it were only training, then it could be retrained. Put a person on a 28-hour day, keep them there, and they would learn it. There was no way to test that above ground, because above ground the sun keeps arriving. So in the summer of 1938, Kleitman and a graduate student named Bruce Richardson carried a bunk bed, a table, and a supply of lanterns 140 feet down into Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, and stayed there for 32 days. It is worth being exact about that, because the exactness is the experiment. There is no daylight in a cave, and no weather in one either. The temperature does not move, the same in what would have been August as in what would have been midnight, for a month. The only thing in that chamber capable of telling either man what time it was a lantern he had lit himself. They set their schedule to a 28-hour day and lived it. 9 hours asleep, 10 working, 9 at rest. And they measured the one thing a body cannot be persuaded to fake, which is its own temperature, because core temperature rises and falls across a day, whether anybody is attending to it or not. Richardson was 20 years younger, and his body took the new schedule. His temperature cycle stretched out and settled onto the 28-hour day, more or less as Kleitman had expected it would. Kleitman's did not. He was in his 40s, in the dark, on the same schedule, eating the same food, in a chamber where nothing outside him changed at all, and his temperature went on rising and falling on something close to 24 hours. As though he was still up in Kentucky in the daylight, keeping ordinary time. He had gone underground to prove the day was a habit. He came back up, having demonstrated that he was carrying one. Stay with that for a moment, because it is genuinely strange. A man 140 feet inside a hill who has personally removed every clock and every sunrise and every change in the weather, and there is still something inside him counting. It will not be argued with. It is not quite 24 hours, and it is his. That month in the dark is the beginning of the science of the body clock, and a great deal of what we now know about sleep comes downstream of it. Kleitman spent the rest of a very long career on the subject, and he is part of the reason we know that dreaming has a stage of its own. Now notice what he did not come back with. He had produced the strongest evidence anyone had yet assembled that a human being runs on an internal daily rhythm, and at no point in any of it did a body hand anybody the number 8. Here is the other thing the cave sets up. If we do have a clock of our own, then the question of what sleep naturally looks like is a question somebody can go and check on people who have never owned a light switch. In 2015, a team of sleep researchers at UCLA did exactly that. 3 groups, hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists in Tanzania, in Namibia, and in Bolivia, wearing wrist monitors continuously across more than 1,000 nights between them. If 2 sleeps were the human default, these are the people who should show it. They sleep between 5.7 and 7.1 hours a night in one block. The researchers went looking specifically for a waking interval in the middle of the night and reported that there was no regular period of activity there at all. No second sleep. Which does not make E. Kirch wrong. His evidence is about Europe, and it is very good evidence. It makes the 2 sleeps something more interesting than human nature. The researchers' own reading is that the pattern was probably not there before people walked into Western Europe, and that what produces it is a long winter night. 16 hours of darkness is an enormous amount of time to lie still, so sleep spread out to fill it. Near the equator, the night runs about 12 hours all year round. There is nothing to spread into. And there is an experiment from 1992 that fits that exactly. A researcher called Thomas Wehr took 7 volunteers and gave them 14 hours of darkness every night for a month. A northern winter, essentially, indoors. Their sleep came apart into 2 blocks, with an hour or more of quiet waking in the middle. Which is the thing out of the diaries. Wehr did not find it in an archive. He produced it in a laboratory in people who had never done it in their lives. Which sounds like a contradiction, and is the reverse. Nobody had to inherit 2 sleeps from their ancestors. Give any human being a long enough night, and they will make them. So we are back where we started. If the body never produced the number, who did? Return to the banner. By the middle of the 19th century, the working day in the industrial world was whatever the factory said it was. 12 hours, 14, longer for children. And the demand that grew up against that was not for a rest of any particular length, It knows that the day be cut into 3. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of what they called recreation, which meant your own life, and 80 hours of rest. The phrase is 40 years older than that march. It is usually credited to a mill owner named Robert Owen at around 1817. Though of people, today, including you, the trail there is thinner than the confidence with which it gets repeated, and I went looking for him saying it and could not find it. What is not in doubt is what happened to it afterwards. It went on to banners, and those stonemasons carried it through Melbourne and Chronic their case, and the arithmetic travelled to Britain, to America, into law, into the ordinary shape of a week. And look at how the 3 eighths were arrived at, because there is nothing subtle about it. There are 24 hours in a day, and 3 things to divide them between. That is the whole calculation. Nobody in that argument was making a claim about sleep. Sleep received the remainder, the 3rd 8, the one nobody was fighting over, because the fight was with the factory. Then the 20th century did what it usually does. A number everybody already knew got picked up by doctors and by public health advice, and in the end, by a device you strapped to your arm. Somewhere along that road it stopped being a demand and quietly became a diagnosis. So, 3 in the morning, you are awake and nothing is wrong. The house is quiet, your mind is unhelpfully clear, and the thing that arrives alongside it is the sense of having failed at something. There is no 8-hour instruction inside you. There is a clock. Kleitman proved that, in the dark, against his own argument, but it does not deal in round numbers, and it did not take its figure from anybody's sum. If you were lying in a cottage in England 400 years ago, this hour would have had a name, and you would have got up and used it. And if you were lying in a camp in Tanzania tonight, it would very likely not be happening at all, because the night is only 12 hours long, and there is nothing for your sleep to spread into. What you are failing to meet is 1/3 of a banner. It was carried through Melbourne by men who wanted to go home earlier, and who would, I suspect, be quite pleased to learn that we are still measuring ourselves against their arithmetic 170 years later. They simply meant something else by it. So, do you wake in the night? And when you do, does it feel like a fault, or have you found something worth doing with it? Tell me below. If this was worth your time, a like helps. Subscribe and the next one finds you. Thank you for watching.